We need to view sex as a mutually pleasurable encounter between two consenting adults where both parties' pleasure is equally important. And it requires a deep, deep cultural change in the way we view, as you were saying, we have to start thinking about sex not as something we do for men, but something we do for ourselves and that we enjoy and that our pleasure is important.
Welcome to yourbrilliance.com. I'm your host, Amy Waterman. And today we're talking about sex. And if you have never heard of our guest for today, then I am so excited for you. My world changed when I discovered the work of Dr. Laurie Mintz, and I hope that the next 20 minutes changes your life in some small way too. We women are fed so much BS about what it means to be sexual. Most of that comes from the media, some of it comes from our parents, and a little tiny bit comes from those sex ed classes back in high school. But what no one told us is that no one really knows all that much about female sexuality. Male sexuality is much better understood. We women have been scientific mysteries for a long, long time. But fortunately, that is changing. And in just a minute, you're going to learn some of the latest research on women and desire and what it means for you. We could have no better guide than Dr. Laurie Mintz. Dr. Mintz is a professor at the University of Florida, where she teaches the psychology of human sexuality to hundreds of undergraduate students each year. She's also a therapist and an author with a blog on Psychology Today and 2 books, Becoming Cliterate and A Tired Woman's Guide to Passionate Sex. Welcome, Dr. Mintz.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Well, as you know, I am a super fan. I discovered your work when you were on my friend Tara Harrison's podcast. And then, of course, I checked out your blog and I was like, whoa, how did I not know this stuff? So I want to start out with what I feel is the most important thing I've learned from you, which is the orgasm gap. What is it and why does it matter?
Okay, so my favorite question and topic, I'm on a mission to close the gap. In the orgasm gap, simply put, is the fact that during heterosexual sexual encounters, the men are having way more orgasms than the women are. In one study, for example, 91% of men versus 39% of women said they always or usually always orgasm during a sexual encounter. Now, that study didn't specify the context of the sex, but in hookup sex, it's really bad. In data I've collected, 55% of men versus 4% of women say they always orgasm during hookup sex. And the gap gets better, but doesn't close in relationship sex, where it's still about 3 male orgasms to every 1 female orgasm.
And what's extraordinary to me is how we have, as women, we just tolerate it. And sometimes we think it's a failing on our part. We should be able to come, and when we don't, we feel ashamed and maybe we fake it. And that definitely doesn't help. So what I really like about your suggestions towards closing that gap is for women to start understanding their own sexual response a bit better. And you've got a great word for it. You say that we need to become more cliterate. What does that mean?
Yes. So cliterate is, it's a play on literate and the clitoris, right? But basically what it means is we need to stop believing cultural lies about our bodies. And the biggest cultural lie that persists is that we should be able to orgasm from penetration alone. And in fact, about 96% of women need clitoral stimulation to orgasm, either alone or coupled with penetration. So becoming cliterate is learning what you need to orgasm and then transferring that to partner sex.
And that's fantastic. So you've got a lot more details of that in your book, Becoming Cliterate, which is wonderful. So what I was really interested too to find out is that there's been a lot of shifts in how we view the female sexual anatomy over the past 100 years. For example, Freud used to tell us that clitoral orgasms were inferior to vaginal orgasms. We used to believe that the clitoris was just this little tiny button. It was certainly quite a small structure compared to the male organ, which now is not true. And so I brought something today. I brought my textbook from back in college, Human Sexuality. This is copyright 1995. So don't do the math and figure out how old I am. I want to know, how are the textbooks that your students are reading, how are they different from what I learned back in the 90s?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because the clitoris has been lost and found again over time. And my mission is to make sure it doesn't get lost again. So I don't know what was in your textbook. It could have been that it came out in the era where we actually knew about the clitoris before it disappeared again from our work. But what I know now is that it is in the textbook I use for my human sexuality class. And my students are shocked because they never learn about it in high school sex ed. And they are, in the absence of good sex ed, they're relying on porn images of sex. And I'm not anti-porn, but it is not a good role model because, stating it frankly, in porn, the man puts his penis in the woman's vagina and she has this instant sheet gripping orgasm. And that's not how it works. And so women are feeling like, oh, that's not happening for me. I'm broken. I had one young woman tell me, I thought my vagina must be broken, she said. And it's so many young women are feeling this because we're fed this, lie without any corrective experience.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about the structure of the clitoris, because that to me was an eye-opener. I followed, there's an artist, Sophie Wallace, who's doing a clitorisy project for the Huffington Post and does some amazing diagrams of what the structure actually looks like.
Yeah, so the clitoris is not just like a little magic button or nub. It's a vast internal organ. And, there's drawings of it you can find online. They're in my book. But basically, the external portion is called the glans, and it's covered by a hood. And that's analogous to the tip of the penis in the male foreskin. But then internally, there's a shaft that goes under the mons pubis, which is sort of this fatty tissue right above your vulva. And then it has legs and bulbs that sort of wrap around the vaginal opening. And in fact, it swells to about 300% its size. It's full of erectile tissue. And when women do orgasm from stimulation of intercourse, the most recent thinking is that it's due to the clitoral bulbs and the clitoral legs and their connection to the vagina. But at the same time, is understanding the whole clitoral structure is important. I don't want that for women to go, oh, so, if my clitoral bulbs are being stimulated enough, I'll orgasm from intercourse. The vast majority, while the internal clitoris is key, what's a really essential piece of information is that the vast majority of women need external stimulation to reach orgasm.
One of the things that really shocked me, and again, I've considered myself very well informed back in the 1990s, and I called my female parts my vagina. And to actually realize, we've had some lovely sex educators onto the show, and they're like, that's not your vagina, that's your vulva. It's like, calling, well, anyway, I won't give any examples, but the fact that I spent my entire youth calling my female parts by the wrong name, this seems to be kind of endemic of a wider cultural, darkening of, we're not supposed to understand our female parts. I don't know. Do you think there's anything cultural going on with the fact that we know so little?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's why my whole book is a combination of cultural analysis and then self-help. And that language issue is one of the most important ones that really demonstrates what really underlies the orgasm gap culturally. It's an overvaluing of men's most reliable route to orgasm, intercourse, and a devaluing of women's most reliable route to orgasm, clitoral stimulation. And if you think about the words we use for sex, we use sex and intercourse as if they were one and the same. And we relegate everything before to foreplay as if it was like just a lead up to the main event. And most importantly, we call our entire genitals a vagina. And by doing so, we're linguistically erasing the part of ourselves that gives us the most pleasure. We're calling our entire genitals by the part involved in penetration and male orgasm.
Wow. So back in the 1960s, there was the sexual revolution, and the big idea was women could finally have sex like men. But after reading your work and thinking about it, I'm wondering if we ended up going in the wrong direction. Maybe sexual freedom lies not in women having sex like men, but women learning how to have sex like women. But if that's the case, what does it mean to have sex like a woman?
Absolutely. And I could not agree more. The sexual revolution made it okay for us to have sexual encounters outside of marriage, but it did nothing to assure that those encounters would be equally pleasurable. And to do that, we need a new sexual revolution for pleasure equality, where we are equal women's and men's most surefire route to orgasm. So rather than expecting women's route to orgasm being the default way that men reach orgasm, or is to make it more of, it's just as important to get clitoral stimulation as penetration. A turn-taking model, for example.
I love that phrase, pleasure equality. I'm thinking of that famous story, I think a year or two ago, with the comedian Aziz Ansari and a woman who went out on a date with him. And he wanted sex and she said no, but he persisted and she ended up giving him oral sex and really regretting it. So we women often have the sense then that I don't know why we still do this, that the most important thing about sex is male pleasure. And the most important reason for sex is to hook a man, to get him into a relationship. How do we need to change our views of sex to create that equality?
We need to view sex as a mutually pleasurable encounter between two consenting adults where both parties' pleasure is equally important. And it requires a deep, deep cultural change in the way we view, as you were saying, we have to start thinking about sex not as something we do for men, but something we do for ourselves and that we enjoy and that our pleasure is important.
I love that. And what I'm thinking about is now kind of switching from casual sex to married sex. One of the interesting statistics is how female desire declines at a very normal rate for each month she's in a committed monogamous relationship. And what we're told is that as women, love is what makes sex good. The more you love someone, the better the sex. So why is it that the longer women are in these loving, monogamous, committed relationships, why is their sex drive going down rather than going up?
Yeah, and I think that is something that's so important, that what you're talking about is as women age and as their longevity of their relationship goes on, they stop feeling spontaneous sexual desire. And kinds of theories why, but it's probably biological. My metaphor is, did you ever use a deodorant for a while and then all of a sudden it stops working? Because you habituate to it and it doesn't have that sort of excited rush. And so many times women think, oh my gosh, I'm not horny anymore. I've lost my sex drive. And then they stop having sex rather than knowing that instead of waiting to be horny to have sex, women can have sex to get horny. You don't have to follow this linear male model again. Everything's like, we're supposed to do it like men. I'm horny, I'm going to have sex, rather than like, oh, I know this is going to be good when it gets going and it's going to be fun and I'm going to do it because I know it's going to be great when it gets going, even if I don't feel spontaneous desire. There's even a word for it. It's called receptive sexual desire. And I have seen that piece of information turn around so many women's sex lives. It's such an important piece of information.
I read recently Wednesday Martin's book, Untrue, about women and desire and whether women actually thrive on monogamy or whether novelty is as important to women. And one of the things that got me questioning is something that's basically a truism in dating advice. Dating advice assumes all women want committed relationships and all men want casual sex, and therefore they shall always be at odds. forevermore. And what she taught me is that maybe that's not actually true. Maybe women are just as carnal creatures as men, but there are reasons that we're not expressing that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what is happening there is not actually true either. Research will show you that men are as interested, almost as interested in relationships as young women. If you ask people, like, would you rather have a relationship or a hookup? It's about 50-50. I mean, it's about equal. So this myth out there is not true. And women are both erotically aroused by novelty, and just like men are. Now, that doesn't mean we can't be in monogamous relationships if we choose, but it does mean we have to do things to keep that fire alive. And one of the first things we have to do is get rid of the idea of spontaneous sex and start planning it. I call them trysts in my book, A Tired Woman's Guide to Passionate Sex. It's a planned meeting between lovers. And it's sort of like you'd never go to lunch with your girlfriend if you didn't plan it. You're not going to have a good sex life in the context sometimes of 2 jobs, children, aging parents, housework, etc., unless you plan it, unless you have trysts built into your life.
And what I like about that is that you're not planning it because you need to fit it into your schedule, but you're planning it so that you can look forward to it and anticipate it and build up that sense of desire rather than just suddenly having to turn it on just like that.
Exactly. It's like a lot of times in long-term marriage, you get into bed at night, which is the worst time to have sex for a lot of women when they're tired and multitasking. And it's like, there's this tension. Are we gonna, aren't we gonna, should we, shouldn't we? And if you actually have these planned trysts, it takes the tension away from these other times, but you can kind of have the anticipation all day of like, this is what I'm doing tonight or this morning or whatever the time might be that you've scheduled your tryst for.
One of the things that I also learned from you that really shocked me, and I'm not sure why it shocked me, but you talk about the importance when foreplay being core play, right? That's kind of the main event, but also how long it should go on before genital contact occurs. Now, usually, so most guys that anyway, in my experience, my girlfriend's experience, foreplay is really a warm up and then it's boom, they want the breast, they want whatever. But you talk about the importance of just having foreplay that's non-genital related. And I thought that was amazing.
Yeah. And, basically, I read a study, I think it was Paul Joannides from the Guide to Getting It On, that the average amount of time young people in heterosexual relationships spend before going right for the genitals is 5 minutes. And it generally takes us a lot longer to get lubricated, warmed up, excited. And the other thing is how quickly we go to penetrative sex from foreplay. And there's a lot of women, this really is a sad statistic for me. A lot of, about 30% of people are reporting pain at their last instance of penetrative sex without saying anything, without saying stop. Because if we don't expect pleasure, we're not going to tolerate pain. And a lot of that pain is having penetration before you're aroused enough, before you're lubricated, before your cervix pulls out of the way. There's all these changes that happen. And so we're really following these terrible porn models of, she's instantly ready for a penis in her vagina. And then she has a big orgasm. And in real life, that is not going to be pleasurable. It's going to be painful for a lot of women.
So how long would you recommend foreplay? And so how long does the average sex act take and how long should it be taking?
So in terms of intercourse, the research is pretty clear. The average time a man takes from putting his penis in a vagina to ejaculation is anywhere from 3 to 6 minutes, despite what you see in porn, lasting all night and all of that. And this is why cliteracy benefits men too. It takes the pressure off of them, because to give this woman this orgasm from thrusting long and lasting hard. And, the actual question, how long, Ian Kerner in his book, She Comes First, which I love, and also want to give him credit for coining the term cliteracy and cliterate. Those terms appeared in his 1994 book, She Comes First. And when I wanted to title my book, Becoming Cliterate, I called Ian and said, can I use these terms? And he said, absolutely. You know, the more cliterate we are, the better. And he recommends 20 minutes. Now, that's fine, but I always tell women, as long as it takes. I know women who it's 4 minutes. I know women it's 45 minutes. As long as it takes is what you need. Period, done, end of story.
Fantastic. And for those of you watching, you need a copy of Becoming Cliterate, and you need to maybe a copy of A Tired Woman's Guide to Passionate Sex. And we have a link for you. To learn more about Dr. Mintz's work, just go to our website, yourbrilliance.org/cliterate. That's CLITERATE. Thank you, Dr. Mintz, for coming on to the show. I so appreciate it. And I wondered if you had any last message you would like to leave our viewers with.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure and an honor. And my message is your pleasure is important. It is equally as important as your partner's pleasure. So figure out what you need to orgasm. And the most essential step to orgasm with a partner is to get the same type of stimulation you get when by yourself. So go figure it out and then tell your partner.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you out there for watching. We hope to see you again soon. Until then, let your brilliance shine.